Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. So, it's almost time for The Last of Us Part 2 to launch, but not quite yet, and clearly displaying strong confidence in the game, Sony have had reviews go up a week before release, and many reviews are absolutely glowing. However, the dissenting opinions are extremely interesting in light of both the leaks and also the extreme restrictions that Sony have actually put on what the review content can cover. Really, this seems like it's primed to be another installment in a long-running series, customers and critics potentially having different reactions to media. There's a hell of a lot to get into, so be sure to hit that like button to help us out with the algorithm and subscribe for future videos, because in just a few hours after this one, we will have our full analysis of Sony's business model and future prospects following their big reveal. So, that's what's up, and let's get into the video. Well, it has happened. The Last of Us Part 2 review embargo has lifted, and there are loads of reviews on the internet. Now, this channel did cover the leaks, and I think a vital part of responsible follow-up to that is to give a broad coverage of how the game has actually been received, and to talk about the diverging opinions, because it is extremely interesting. This is a situation where, by all metrics, this game is being extremely well received critically. However, I actually noticed that some of the unscored reviews, outlets like Kotaku and Polygon, do not give a score because they don't really believe that an out of 5 or out of 10 score is what best captures a game review. Well, they actually have had quite a lot more negative to say, and overall it's an extremely interesting story. So let's get stuck into it. I think this is going to be a really exciting one. First of all, there is some vital context that you all need to understand. This game is about 25 hours long. It does seem to be significantly longer than its predecessor. Now, reviewers could only use footage from an early 5-hour slice of the game. Okay, so that does mean that some of the later on things they're not really able to show. Now, some of that is good and bad. Some of the things that people might have more of an issue with, they can't show those. However, equally, some of the better segments in the game, like set pieces and combat, are also something that can't be shown in the reviews. Additionally, specific plot details can't really be talked about, bar general things like explaining the warring factions, right, their names and the general setup of the story. And what is a lot more key is that a part of the conditions for getting a review copy is the total, basically there's a total shutdown on people mentioning anything about the second half of the game. Now, of course, to anybody who is aware of the leaks, or at least knows that, yeah, there's like a major narrative decision is made by Naughty Dog in the second half of the game as it transitions into that of course will be a very interesting little nugget of information. So that is your context of these reviews. Now, of course, the reviewers will have played the entire game. It's just that in their review, like their written pieces or their videos, they have to deal with those restrictions. So with that said, let's get on to the reviews, right? There are loads of 9s, loads of 10s, loads of 8s, right? Really high scores. And I found this to be extremely interesting because when you dive into it, I actually found that Kotaku and Polygon were some of the most negative outlets when it came to the story, the characters, and the themes that were at play in this game. However, many other outlets were extremely positive about the entire game, including those things, hence those extremely high critical ratings. What I then thought was a bit more interesting is that SkillUp provided what I'd say is a more everyman review, and I don't mean that as, pejorative or anything. I just mean, sort of like us. He's a guy on YouTube. He does make great review content, and he falls sort of outside, right? Outside the outlets like your Kotakus, your Polygons, your GameSpots, your IGNs, etc. Now, he said, specifically, he mentioned that the last half of the game was where he found sort of large narrative issues, where he felt it was deconstructing the first game's characters, but in a way that was not really emotionally successful. Now, I think that is interesting because it will tie into something we'll discuss later on in this video, which is the critic versus audience divide. And I have to wonder if SkillUp, by sort of nature of being, coming at it from a customer first, right, from that perspective, if his thoughts would be falling more on those of the average consumer. So it is a very interesting situation, the large critical divide. Even though, yes, the vast majority of outlets are super, super positive on this game, it's interesting that Kotaku and Polygon specifically had so much, I suppose, negative or at least critical to say about elements of the narrative and the themes. So let's move on then to what I think are core things to understand about how this game is being received, so that you basically understand what the crack is. Okay, combat and things like that are very much standard with refinements from the first Last of Us game. That means that it basically will feel a little bit last gen, a little bit dated. So it's not really something that's going to earn new fans, but if you enjoyed the combat in the last game, you should enjoy it this time. And certainly it is something that will benefit from the masterful implementation of just about everything by Naughty Dog. And I'd certainly say this, even if Naughty Dog maybe don't have a good idea, they'll implement it extremely well. So there might be a scene that you don't like in the game, or the combat you might not enjoy, but if you actually look at, say, the animations and all of those things, they will be exquisitely implemented. Now, going back to the gameplay, well, the levels are quite a bit longer. It seems like there is less of an emphasis on environmental puzzles and that kind of thing. And basically, it is just more of the same with evolutionary improvements, not revolutionary improvements, with some reviewer skill up included feeling that it just regressed a little bit in terms of not doing much with environmental puzzles. And then, of course, the levels are actually said to be quite a bit longer as well, and that there generally are more gameplay segments, and that this is a longer game overall than the first one. So that's basically the core of actually playing this game. It's what you really will expect. You get your big cutscenes, your character moments, you've got your combat sections, and it basically is a linear game. A pretty well-designed linear game, but that type of game. Now, let's talk about the narrative, because I think this is where things get the most interesting. I don't think many people actually play the Last of Us games for the gameplay, other than maybe the multiplayer of the first one actually being, I think, quite novel. So on the narrative, the most I can say is that it does seem like Druckmann and co. very much made a game that lives up to what they said. As in, it is a game that is about hate and a game about cycles of revenge. Those are things that people behind this game have said in interviews and things like that. And yes, just about every single review says that this absolutely is the focus of the game. Now, what's very interesting is the nature of divergence within critical opinions on how well this was executed. So, for Kotaku and Polygon as examples, they found the consistent violence to be draining and desensitizing, and that they basically sort of would feel dull to it, right? Now, there's a bit there where you might think, oh, they just can't handle the video game violence. Yes, that could be one angle of it. Another angle of that could just be that there is so little balance in how these things are portrayed and in the pacing of the game that you're basically just like, yeah, we're killing more dudes, we're stabbing more dudes, we're choking more dudes, right? It would just sort of go like that. Now, drilling into that a little bit more, it seems like for a lot of people what's happened is that the characters in the game don't really grow and change. That this is a game about hate and cycles of revenge, and that from start to finish, what happens is hate and cycles of revenge, and not a massive amount of our characters actually interrogating their behavior, understanding it, perhaps growing as people, and having some sort of narrative that's moving in that direction, that's engaging with its themes in that manner. It feels very much like they said, our themes are hate, cycles of revenge, and we are just going to show that in exquisite, excruciating detail for a very long running time. And for some people, they're like, yeah, you showed that. You certainly did make us feel it with how well animated it was and all of that. However, you didn't really do much with it, bar just show it. So that's basically where you're getting some of the critical divergence here. There's a lot of showing why the cycles of hatred and revenge and violence are bad, but some reviewers feel that that is a very surface level thing, that the story is putting great effort into that stuff happening, even at the expense of some scenes, some reviewers are saying don't really feel believable, or characters who maybe have got warped logic, but that basically while they are doing that the game is not providing a meaningful commentary on it, that's not interrogating its themes, or that the characters are not learning and growing. And that is basically where the core disagreement comes in. Some people feel that showing the extremely detailed violence and all of that stuff happening is worthy of great artistic merit, because it basically is so visually strong and with characters you care about that I would say it hits the soul, right? And you actually viscerally feel it, and that you will leave that game thinking about those themes, even if the game itself and its narrative didn't do a whole lot with its themes other than just show them in that great excruciating detail. However, my read on some of the other opinions out there is that some people feel that, yeah, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of hatred, but it feels cynical and that it lacks heart. Now, for some people, they are saying that that just wasn't an enjoyable experience to them. There was all this cynical hatred and violence, but that there wasn't really the catharsis, the relief, and maybe the pacing and the thematic work that would actually elevate something. Because if you look at the first game, it was extremely violent. It had some really, when you think about it on paper, like with just some of those characters, some absolute hardcore stuff going down, but it was a game that still had a lot of beauty, a lot of heart, a lot of humanity in it. A lot of people basically feel like that beauty and heart and humanity has been replaced with hate, because they are doubling down completely on that as the identity of this game. And that really is the contrast with The Last of Us 1, that emotional core. It feels like some people feel that emotional core is lacking in The Last of Us Part 2. Now, my personal take there is that bold artistic direction was taken by the team at Naughty Dog. They obviously did not play this one safely, and I actually have a lot of respect for that. I think that is something that's quite daring. However, it does seem that whether or not they succeeded there is a highly, highly subjective thing, that many people will find it to be cold and cynical, and that basically there won't be much to take away from it because most of us already know that hatred and violence are basically bad things. Whereas for a lot of people, they will feel that it was so raw, so impactful, that it really just cut to their core, that it will be an experience that stays with them afterwards, surely because it was a big harrowing experience that they went through. And then the other side of this, which obviously does tie into the review embargo situation, is that a lot of the critical opinions, from what I have gathered, seem to be stemming from the latter half of the game specifically, and of course that's the bit that you're basically not allowed to mention a single thing about in these reviews. That's like a condition of getting a review copy. Now, to those who are aware of the leaks, they can piece some bits together there and come to their own conclusion. Of course, that's something we'll all be able to talk about when the game actually comes out on the 19th of June. Now, the thing that then I'm taken onto here is audience versus critics. It's a very interesting thing that has been happening as of late, where we're getting loads of movies and TV shows that critics are loving and audiences are really not liking, or maybe that audiences are loving and critics aren't really liking. And I think that's an interesting thing, because analyzing something for its artistic merit, I think if you're going in purely from that perspective, you maybe will have different weightings on different aspects of that medium, and that will be reflected in your final score. And I feel like this is a situation where audience and critic rifts are going to be quite a major thing. I think a lot of critics will be coming in at this with a bit more of a dispassionate position. Their job is to sit down, play this game for 24 hours, and give their critical opinion of it. So they're going to be entering it in that more highly analytical state. Whereas I think the audience members who would be really engaged with this game, or who would at least be, the type of person who would be engaged with that, how will they go into it? Well, they will go into it thinking, I loved Joel, I loved Ellie, I thought they were really interesting characters, I loved the morally ambiguous ending and how all of that played out, and I just can't wait to see more of this story and the journey of these characters. I think that is a very different perspective to somebody who is coming in here to basically, do a critical opinion that is based off its artistic merit. And I think that's where, if we do see this audience versus critic rift, I think that's basically going to be the core of it. Now, as for my personal take on this, I am going to play this game, likely in its entirety. And the reason why is because it's interesting, it seems to me. I want to see what this does well and what it does not do well. Now, some of that is because, as an enthusiast of games, I am interested in that. Another part of this is, my studio, right? We're going to be working on some, let's just say a broad range of titles, a few of which, like our first one, pretty dark in some ways. So I want to be able to see what other people are doing well, and maybe what they're not doing so well, so we can all learn and grow from it. But admittedly, that's a very different perspective from somebody who's coming in absolutely having loved The Last of Us 1. And I am in that situation as well. I loved The Last of Us 1. And yeah, I didn't think it had the most groundbreaking gameplay. I thought the gameplay was perfectly fine and serviceable, and I thought there was a bit of a raw brutality to it that I actually quite appreciated, even though I think it had some UX sort of playability issues that a lot of other people face. They just weren't really much of a problem for me. So for me, it was that, and then I just loved Joel and Ellie as a cast, and I thought it just had such a great cast, such a great story. I thought it was exquisite, to be completely honest with you. So I am also coming in from that perspective, and I think one of the things I'll be extremely interested in is how the critical part of my mind sort of interfaces with, me as an emotional person who obviously is going to care about these characters and their journey. So I probably am going to do some sort of video once I have played the full game, so I can sort of tell you where I'm coming from on this. And part of that as well is I think that because because this is a channel where we did cover the leaks, and, you know, I gave you my initial impressions of the leaks, of course in a way that didn't mention them, and how they were, I think, playing into a cynicism that I've seen across a lot of American media, a sort of a nihilism. I will admit I do have a little bit of a worry about that cropping up here, but yeah, that's basically what's up. I think the push and pull between those two sides of my, I guess, profile as a player, that's what I'm really interested in diving into in review content, and I think that's something that will provide some value to the audience and perhaps also explain a little bit of that critic versus audience divide. So overall, an extremely interesting situation. I think this game initially is going to do extremely well in terms of performance. Most people will not have heard about the leaks, right? Most of your average gamers, right? Or, you know, even people who would not say I'm a gamer, you know, people who just own a PlayStation and play the odd game, right? I think that it will get great pre-orders, great early sales, and then that is when stuff will get interesting, because then the audience feedback will come in. And that certainly will be interesting how it plays into a lot of broader narratives that are going on in, I think, the media and culture space at the minute. So there you go. That is my thoughts on this. I hope that this has, I guess, helped you to understand my post-leak perspective, and also just a little bit of synthesis to help, sort of absorb all that's going on with the critical response. I hope you enjoyed this video. Of course, be tuned to the channel, because we will have a big video on the PS5 situation and a lot of analysis on what that will mean for the industry coming up pretty soon. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.